So we have some folks online, Mr. Chair, that are members of the Ag Commission and also a producer as well that would like to speak to this. So if I could just maybe give some opening remarks, and I'm going to turn it over to Secretary Curley and also Abby Willard after that. So we've got just a few remarks, and then we can certainly, with enough time, we can do some Q&A.
Good. So in your opening remarks, you can give us a little background on the commission and.
Yeah, I think I'll do like an overview, and Secretary Curley will give a little overview too with it. So we'll just, mine are pretty brief, but it would be great to hear from, members of the commission outside of state government who've been with us and doing a lot of the work, and they're on the line there. So
great. Well, good morning, everybody, and we'll look forward to getting to hear from everybody.
Okay, well, here we go. So again, Anson Tebbets, Secretary of Agriculture, Food and Markets. Great to be with you again. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about the future of agriculture and the Governor's Commission on the future of agriculture. As I mentioned, I'm joined by a few of our commissioners online and in the room. And just a bit of history, the commission was created by executive order by Governor Scott. It came out of the pandemic. We realized farming and food were vulnerable, and we discovered that there were some gaps as we tried to feed Vermonters and those in the region. The commission convened on April 1st, 2021, and myself and the co-chair, Secretary Curley, is with us from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, the co-chair of the commission. I want to just highlight a couple of the action plans. We had 4 priorities on the future of agriculture. 1, all Vermonters benefit from healthy, nutritious food and a robust local food system. 2, Vermont fuels agriculture business entrepreneurship, growth, and sustainability so that food producers and businesses are profitable across ranges of sizes, stages, and business models. Vermont attracts and supports the next generation of farmers, and Vermont strengthens and supports its brand. We have made some progress in some of these areas already, but we know that we need to make more investments in this area to be more successful. In our budget, the governor's budget, we have proposed some groundbreaking investments in food and farming. The governor's budget leverages innovative investments and programs to grow Vermont's food, farm, and forestry economy. And one of the recommendations in the report, and one of the conclusions was all Vermonters benefit from healthy, nutritious foods and a robust local food system. So to help address that, in our budget, we propose investing $10 million in a granting funding program for small and mid-sized agriculture producers and value-added processors in the meat, produce, and maple sectors. These are the areas of our food system that have been under-resourced or possibly ineligible for available funding. This investment would be distributed to Vermont businesses specializing in meats, produce, and maple products. This support will help grow their companies and become more efficient while producing more food, which is critically important for Vermont and the region. The other highlight I want to mention outside of the $10 million ask was investing more in the Working Lands Program. There's $4 million proposed in that, of $1 million in the base budget, but $3 million in one-time funding dedicated to the Working Lands Enterprise Fund. This program allows food and forestry businesses to expand, and this investment was also recommended by the Governor's Commission of Agriculture. At this point, if it's appropriate, I'd like to turn it over to the co-chair, Secretary Curley, who also has some more details about the commission and going forward.
Thank you. Good morning, Secretary Curley.
Good morning. For the record, I'm Lindsay Curley. I'm the Secretary of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and we just say what an honor it is to be here in your committee room. I this is a first for me to be invited to testify here.
Would you like us to introduce
I
ourselves?
would love that.
Yeah, go ahead. Why don't you start, Representative?
David Templeman. I represent Orleans, Barton, and Westmore.
Hello.
Henry Pearl, I represent Danville, Cabot, Peach.
Great.
Jed Lipsky, I represent Stowe.
Rodney Graham, I represent Williamstown and Chelsea.
Okay.
David Durfee, represent Shaftesbury, Glastonbury, and Sunderland.
Okay.
There's Supernaut, Windsor 4, I represent Barnard, Pomfret, and Bridgewater.
Esme Cole, Windsor 6, Hartford.
Great.
Mike Rice, represent the Bennington Rutland District, Danby, Dorset, Landgrove, Mount Tabor, and Peru.
Okay.
Josie Levitt, Grandal Chittenden, all of Grandal County, and West Milton.
Great. Well, it's so nice to meet you all. So thank you. So, and thank you for teaming me up, Secretary Tebbetts. So the Agency of Commerce and Community Development welcomed the opportunity to further collaborate with the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, along with farm food leaders across Vermont as part of the Future of Agriculture Commission. For many years, our agency, through the Department of Tourism and Marketing, has worked collaboratively with the Agency of Agriculture to promote and grow awareness of Vermont products and agritourism opportunities to potential visitors and residents. Working on the future of ag has been a great extension of that work, and to have our agency at the table for this discussion is critical because of how important the sector is to our economy as a whole, with thousands of jobs at stake, whether in the field, on the farm, or in the factory. I want to take a moment to identify those who worked on this commission, and we are so grateful for their expertise in several areas. And I do think there's a slide that has their names on it. If that could be flashed up, I don't know does somebody have control or no? Okay, maybe not. Maybe you can all look. Okay, perfect, great. Look, I think somebody's driving the ship here, but I'll just read them quickly. Jed Davis, Kate Finley Woodruff, Harold Hourigan, Ellen Kaler, David Mance, Leslie McCrory Wells, Mieko Ozeki, Josh Poulin, Nick Richardson, David Roth, and Stephen Schubert. All of these folks have contributed countless hours to these reports that we've done and giving us all of their expertise. So we're super grateful. Overall, there was remarkable support for the commission's strategies in the FY23 budget and through other federal sources. 13 out of the commission's 18 strategies did receive some degree of funding or other support from the administration or legislature, with total potential funding equaling well more than $70 million. While important gaps remain, this degree of fiscal support and overall progress within a single year represents great momentum as we continue to look for ways to bolster and prepare the sector for the future economy of Vermont. As some of you might be aware, the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, this might be new to you, but we were appropriated more than $50 million in economic and community development funding to grant projects that will have lasting and resounding community and economic development impacts. So while we're still accepting and reviewing applications for the bulk of that money, I can report that some of the money is going to agricultural products in the sector, from supporting food processor expansion to providing funding that will get big projects that have been waiting years to be greenlit over the finish line, and even help new innovative products like dry ice expand production to help support businesses' abilities to supply fresh fruit throughout the region. While some of the projects are receiving funding through the Agency of Commerce and Community Development's Capital Investment Program and Community Recovery and Revitalization Program, there are many projects that still need funding. One of the main hurdles to accessing ACCD's programs, that's what we call ourselves, that's our acronym, is that they are funded through the Federal American Rescue Plan dollars. As with any federal money, there are certain requirements and strings attached that can make accessing these funds onerous and even disqualifying some of the great ideas our ag community has for evolving and expanding in these years ahead. Some of the hurdles include showing documented impact and loss tied directly to the pandemic, or projects that need to be tied to the creation of housing, childcare, or helping severely impacted sectors like tourism or hospitality recover. So while some projects are being funded, we are seeing an opportunity to pair federal dollars through the ACCD programs with additional state dollars that come with less federal red tape and how they are used. So this is why we at the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, along with the Future of Ag Commission, some of the commissioners who you see here today, support the ask of $10 million in one-time funding for ag-related development projects. This would allow us to move past the pandemic and to fund projects that don't just look backwards at previous losses, but would look forward at building the ag economy of tomorrow. So we really do hope that you'll support this important budget ask as we at the agency look forward to our continued collaboration with the Agency of Agriculture and strengthening Vermont businesses to benefit all Vermonters. So thank you very much. And with that, I think I'm turning it over to Abby, unless there are questions, certainly happy to take any questions that you might have.
Well, let me ask the committee if you've got questions for Secretary Curley, and we may get to a point where we have questions and we're not sure who to direct them to.
Yeah.
I think let me just ask, we will have maybe questions about the kinds of projects that might be funded. Would it be better to wait until after we've heard from other folks?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. I'll stay around. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. So for the record, Abby Willard, Agency of Agriculture. I too just wanted to demonstrate the appreciation that I have for the Future of Ag commissioners, so 3 of which are going to speak with you in a few moments. For the past 2 years, they've met monthly. They had the charge from the executive order from the governor's office to put forth in 3 different annual reports, short-term and long-term strategies that looked at economic development opportunities that had a social, economic development, and environmental impact. The commission was really clear from the beginning that they didn't want to start from scratch. There's been a lot of work done in recent years around agricultural and food system development. So the plan that Ellen Kaler from Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund has shared with you in the past, which we call Vermont's Agriculture and Food System Strategic Plan, was the foundation for many of the recommendations that the commissioners took on. So each and every month for the past 2 years, these commissioners have met, they've looked at those recommendations and priority strategies outlined in that plan. They've met with experts, brought in different panels, and done outreach and engagement with their stakeholders. And their objective was to present to the governor's office and then resulting in a public plan, action items to be taken up as either policy, investments, or kind of like new program creation. So that first plan was submitted to the governor's office in November of 2021. He released it and made it public in February of 2022. And then we submitted a supplemental plan just this past November, so November of 2022. And then as soon as the budget address was announced, that plan was also public. So both of those plans are on the Agency of Agriculture website. And if you haven't seen them, they're a great resource of sort of like what are some of these recommended priorities for the future of agriculture. So that first plan had 18 strategy recommendations. The second plan had 14 strategy recommendations. And as Secretary Curley said, there were many budgetary investments that our agencies made, that this legislative body made in supporting priorities that came out of that first plan. Out of this second supplemental plan, there were multiple strategies that have been so far combined into 2 recommendations in the proposed FY24 budget. And that first is, and they're both in the category of leveraging existing economic development opportunities in the food system and local food arena for the benefit of the future of agriculture in Vermont. So one of those recommendations is around a $3 million one-time appropriation to working lands. The second is this 10 million one-time appropriation for small and mid-scale farms and food and processors in the meat, maple, and produce arena, both for producers and processors. So we've talked a lot about the Working Lands Program, so I feel like at this point you're probably relatively familiar with the impact of the program that's about impacting and maintaining agricultural land and production. So the program, since its initiation in 2012, I think has impacted 24,000 acres to remain directly enrolled in ag production. It's about creating jobs. So again, the Working Lands investments have already invested over 500 new jobs in the ag and food and working land sector. So again, it could be agriculture and forestry. Employing people in the ag and food and working land sector, so over 1,100 employees as a result of those working lands grants. And, really importantly, from an economic development standpoint, would be the over $55 million in sales generated as a result of those grants. So the program has, the established reputation, the industry kind of looks forward to it and expects those resources. And as we've talked about in the past, we've had pretty unprecedented, thanks to this legislative body and your support, investments in the Working Lands Program. So in FY22 and in FY23, we've had over $3 million in that program annually. So the proposed for FY24 right now is $4 million. So a $1 million base and then this $3 million one-time appropriation. And so again, as you know, what we've learned over the past few years is that when we have record investment in the Working Lands Program, we see record demand. So both FY22 and FY23, we've seen over $10 million in applications come in for that program. So to continue to see kind of monumental investments in the program feels like the right thing to do at this time. When we look at the history of investments in the Working Land Program, we can demonstrate that there's a need and opportunity for further investments in the maple industry, in value-added production, in produce, and processing of meat. So those continue to be areas that Working Lands has invested, but not as heavily as we would like. So I think that is a nice segue into the $10 million kind of proposal, which would be a brand new program for 1 year. The way it's written in the big bill currently is for small and mid-scale, both producers and processors, to receive competitive grants if they are in the meat, produce, or maple sectors. So it actually says vegetable sector. So one conversation that we're kind of exploring as a technical correction would be to more clearly and accurately define that to be produce, which would include berries and fruit. Which we believe was the original intent of the commission's recommendation. And so hopefully that language, as it leaves the JFO, you'll see that technical correction. And if not, let's talk about it and see if this committee is supportive of that change. So I just want to talk about those three sectors really quickly. And you have the great privilege of hearing from Justin Rich from Burnt Rock Farm, who can speak probably far more eloquently than I can about the produce industry that he's so engaged in. But I'll start with the maple sector. So the maple industry is at least a $56 million industry in Vermont. So we produce the most maple syrup in the country. I think it was over 2.5 million gallons last year. So a huge industry in Vermont. And it's growing quickly. And the industry has huge barriers to entry, mostly due to the cost of equipment and setting up infrastructure for a maple sugaring operation. Lots of innovation that's evolving quickly around the technology and modernization of the sector. And they communicate how high their energy costs are, how tough the labor industry is, and the challenges that they face around packaging. So really see this as, an opportunity to support Vermont's maple industry remaining in a prominent role in the sector. And an opportunity to support the over 1,000 producers that are at least members of the Vermont Sugar Makers Association, and there's likely more than 1,000 maple producers in the state, but a great sector to invest in. As far as the produce sector is concerned, So again, over a $52 million industry in Vermont and growing. So due to the ag census, there's over 700 produce farms in Vermont, but I suspect that there's more than that. From the work that we've done on the produce safety program at the Agency of Agriculture, what we see is that many operations in the produce sector are small and they're selling direct to consumer. So there's a real opportunity for those industries to grow, to reach new markets, reach new out-of-state consumers, to tap into the wholesale market arena, kind of get their product to major metro markets outside of Vermont. And hear about opportunities for the industry to capitalize more of the consumer dollar by engaging in value-added processing, making investments in storage, and oftentimes making renovations to the infrastructure that they're already using, which is oftentimes the dairy industry's infrastructure. So old barns, old infrastructure that may not be as best suited for the produce industry. So again, really see an opportunity for expansion in the production of produce in Vermont, and a possible solution for utilization of some of the acreage that we're seeing lost from the dairy industry. So growth opportunity certainly in produce. In the meat sector, I think we've talked a fair bit about, the meat industry being both the livestock production side, but then also the meat slaughter and processing side to sort of turn that livestock into a human consumption product. And we know that there's a slaughter and processing capacity challenge in Vermont. We just talked about this the other day. We know that producers are forced to process their animals outside of Vermont. We know that there's a lack of infrastructure for small ruminants, so particularly for sheep and goats and for halal inspection. We know from consumers that they're desiring more value-added curing and smoking and aging of meat products, and we need the infrastructure and equipment to be able to support that in state. There's been a lot of federal funds through the U.S. Department of Agriculture invested in the meat slaughter and processing industry. And yet, I think we've had maybe 3 grants in Vermont in the past 2 years. And it's because those funds are not scaled appropriately for Vermont production and processing. They're not, that the barrier to application is so high. And they oftentimes only fund a very small percentage of the project cost, so 20% of the project cost, which leaves the operation with the lion's share of the responsibility to invest. So we continue to look for opportunities for seeing that custom inspection expand into more state and federal inspections and more partnerships in the processing community. And then we know that when we have the processing capacity, we can see the livestock industry respond and expand and grow as well. So those are kind of like my understanding that I can best share with you about the opportunities and the challenges that exist in those 3 sectors. I think it may make sense to just open it up for questions if you have generally about the opportunities around these 2 granting opportunities, or to hear from our commissioners and from Justin.
Great. Yeah. Just before we go to questions, and thank you for that testimony. We'll see if there are any questions, but sure. I failed to include when we were introducing everyone, one of our committee members is also on Zoom.
I saw.
Hidden, I think, at the moment, but John O'Brien. John, are you there, Representative O'Brien? Good.
I'm here. John O'Brien, I represent Royalton and Tunbridge. Thank you, Chair.
So with that, then, questions on, go ahead, Dave.
Okay. You mentioned that this $10 million grant would be eligible for small and mid-sized farmers. What definition of small and mid are we talking?
It's a good question, Representative. So it's not in the bill language currently. I think when we've talked about developing the proposal for the program, I suspect that we would use the definitions that we maintain at the Agency of Agriculture around what is a small farm and a medium farm, which has to do with animal units, acres, and does that sound like?
And so slightly familiar here with some of those definitions, that there's certified small. Is that what you're talking about? Or is this a different quantification metric?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, at this point, we're open to suggestions. I don't think we've outlined the parameters of the program to that degree. I think we've, in one of the slides of our presentation, we've talked about a little bit of kind of the areas of investment that we imagine making. But I think we can define small to mid-scale businesses kind of with input.
And to go on, just one more question.
Yeah.
Is there any sense of what portions of that 10 million will go to small versus medium, or is that also not defined yet?
Yeah, again, it's not defined. Sort of the approach that we've contemplated thus far is that we would actually do one funding opportunity for the full $10 million, but we would divide it into 3 sectors by the 3 industries.
Right.
So that maple operations would compete against maple, produce against produce, and meat against other meat operations. And that we would review them all at once, so that we wouldn't be saying up front that we're going to do 3.3 million of investment in each of those 3 sectors, but instead see what we receive for a competitive applications. And, we could do 6 million in maple and 2 in meat and, whatever, depending upon what we receive for competitive applications, and kind of model that very much after the Working Lands Programs review process. So do a pre-application where we get a sense of what applicants are thinking. It gets reviewed with an external review plus agency staff. We invite a select number back for a full round application, and then we review that full round of applications and disperse the 10 million.
Are there any existing definitions for produce growers or maple operations or processing? So we do have the definitions for farming for animals. But.
Yeah, Chair Durfee, it's a great question. I'm not as probably familiar with all the definitions that exist in our statute as I should be, but I know we have some of those definitions, and I know there's some industry standards that we would probably look to if we don't have it all defined in statute. But it's a good question that I'm sorry I can't perfectly answer.
Representative.
Wondering if there was any discussion with the commission about opportunities around tree nuts, and if including that sort of broadly under that produce category would be of interest in this program. It's like an expanding area in the Northeast in general, and something that a lot of both could have opportunities on their own, and also as a sort of way for perhaps maple and also vegetable and fruit farmers to diversify?
Yeah, it's a great question. So tree nuts is certainly included in the U.S. definition of a specialty crop. And we do have limited resources that are available from a cooperative agreement that we have with USDA for the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program. But I will admit, it's not typically designed for producers to apply and receive those funds, but more for partnership opportunities and technical assistance. So I guess I would agree with you that it's an opportunity or a sector that we don't necessarily have enough sufficient resources to invest in. So what I'm imagining is that we will need to, in the 10 million, really define who's eligible. And this is where then $4 million in the Working Lands Program can be a nice supplement for that, since maybe what's not eligible within the 10 million could be eligible to apply for Working Lands. So I can't answer your question right now as to whether we imagine including it in the 10 million or not, but if not, then they would be eligible within Working Lands, because they certainly would be considered an agricultural producer. Yeah.
Representative Supranat?
Thank you, Abby. That was so great. As this is the future of agriculture, I think it's apt to say that there wouldn't be a future of agriculture without the next generation of folks entering that field. And I think we understand that those sector barriers are access to land. And it was exciting for me because I think this is the second time we've heard in this committee that we are looking at the possible utilization of acreage from those dairy farms who have gone out or are transitioned to something. And I'm just wondering, are those conversations preliminary? Is that something that is already under works that you're thinking about how we can establish a transition program that would include some grant funding from this possible 10 million? Or are these so new that that's just really far out future?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think we share the concern. One of the 4 pillars of focus from the Future of Ag Commission priority was around supporting and attracting the next generation of farmers. There are a variety of recommendations in that supplemental report that sort of speak to land access and support for new and beginning farmers. I know there's a bill out there supporting sort of new and beginning producers. There's a lot of research that we put into the legislative report around resources that are currently available to new and aspiring farmers. So I would say we've had lots of conversations, and there was panel discussion that the Future of Ag Commission took on new and beginning farmers. So I would say the awareness and the knowledge and the focused attention on that need and sector existed within the many conversations of the commission. As to how we best invest in those sectors, I think the Working Lands Program is a great opportunity to do that as well. So I think we can kind of collectively think of $14 million, both the 3 million one time, the 1 million base for Working Lands, and this 10 million one time as a combined pool to invest both in the future of agriculture through looking at land access issues, viability of businesses, and that sort of support of new and beginning. One of the things that we've talked about within the agency is like, how do we when do we schedule the announcement of these funding opportunities, both the Working Lands and this new 10 million, in a way that both the industry is available and can respond. So, and that's a challenge at times because the growing season doesn't work well for most of our produce industry or those that are raising livestock. But in the winters, when our maple industry is like totally swamped because they're sugaring. So we need to really think about what's that window of opportunity when the combined sectors are available to put time and energy into an application. And how do we also schedule it so that they're making a real conscious decision of, do I apply to Working Lands? Do I apply to the 10 million? What's the best fit based upon dollars available, size of the grants, and the need of our project? So one of the things that we've talked about for the 10 million is to have it be larger scale applications. So maybe have those be projects that are between $100,000 and $250,000 projects, so that it's really designed as like a one-time significant infrastructure investment, because it's not going to be here. I mean, we'd love to see it there long-term, but it's built as a one-time investment. Whereas the Working Lands Program, which is really more of an established program, that might be some of that, like rely upon annual funding opportunity for businesses to compete for. Again, not every applicant that applies for Working Lands each year is able to receive their grant because it is so competitive. But so I would sort of hope that we'll do a variety of listening sessions and kind of introductions to the 2 different funding opportunities for applicants to make the right choice of where they should best apply based upon, how much money they're looking for, what type of practice or investment their project is sort of focused on. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Representative Lipsky.
Thank you. I appreciate all of your presentations and look forward to the remote ones.
Yeah, we're saving the best for last.
This is more of an observation because we are the agriculture, food resiliency, and forestry. Maple, when we talk in the forest products industry and the impact on our economy, we talk about $2.1 billion of impact, and a significant, but certainly a minority of that economic impact is from the maple industry. 100% of the discussion here, I assume that the Department of Agriculture has decided to contribute a third of this $10 million request or budget item to that particular segment because maple's an edible product. But I can't help but feel within the government in general that forest products industry is sort of, the silence has been deafening. And I just want to point that out. Not that I'm not a strong advocate for the maple industry. Of course I am, as all of the initiatives. And you did point out about the working lands. I think that's been a very, it's a wonderful initiative. It's tiny, but it just, you could clarify that maple has been co-opted into agriculture. Is that because it's edible or?
I mean, I think that we define maple production as agriculture because yes, it is producing a food product. In the Working Lands program, though, as you recognize, that is for agriculture, food, forestry, and wood product manufacturing. So Working Lands can invest in all of those sectors. And I think we acknowledge that where the food system is in a slightly different phase and stage of development and collaboration as the forestry sector. As someone whose father was a forester and a logger and whose brother is a forester and a logger and both were in the maple sugaring industry, I have great appreciation for how hard that sector works and how much resources are needed to support them. And Working Lands is one of the sole programs that makes annual investments in that sector. And I think we're starting to see them kind of engage as a system and start to think about the future of workforce development and marketing and promotion and export. So I think there's room for that sector, but.
Yeah, and full disclosure, I have been a lifelong logger. It's pretty much 15 years old, did other things and got some education. I'm concerned.
Maybe just add I know there's a program out there, it's in the Northern Borders Regional Commission now, and I think they're making significant investments in a program for the forestry sector now. I don't know all the details of that, but that's another, in that realm of potential funding that's out there, either through the farm and forestry economy. And I want to say it's a 10 million program that's out there now that they're trying to invest just in this forestry sector alone. Something to explore.
Yep.
Want to be sure we leave plenty of time for the other guests and.
I'm happy to come back anytime. I'm just across the street. I'm easier than this all.
Well, Representative Templeman had a question. Why don't we give him a chance and then we'll.
Just real short, and then we can move on. So these three categories, why were those chosen? I'm curious to know.
You mean the maple, the meat, and the produce? Yeah. I think they were identified primarily as like three sectors that are historically underinvested in, have great growth potential, and infrastructure barriers to entry.
Got it.
So just sort of saw real opportunity within those three sectors. And that's not to say that dairy doesn't also experience the same thing or other specialty crops, but we sort of identified these as areas for greatest investment and opportunity.
When you say opportunity, do you mean financial independence? Because, one of the things we're seeing from other industries that are from the agricultural sector is that they become very dependent on subsidies. Were these chosen because they may have the ability to stand on their own? Or would you foresee that these industries may have to continually receive government money in reaction to climatic change and those sorts of.
Yeah, I mean, that's a far larger question than I think I have the time to answer right now. But I would say each of those three sectors have the potential to protect the agricultural land in Vermont that we feel is at risk. They also represent a diversification of agriculture that also creates the opportunity for farm businesses to retain more of that consumer dollar. And as alternatives or complements to kind of the changes that we're seeing in the dairy economy.
So why don't we, I think we may want to have you come back to talk specifically about the budget request, or Secretary Tebbetts, whoever is the appropriate person or people. We have into next week, but not far into next week, to try and pull together our recommendations for the House Appropriations Committee. So
Okay.
maybe we can find some time, but why don't we turn to your the other folks and hear directly from them.
Yeah, so Mieko, Jed, and David as 3 Future of Ag commissioners, and then Justin Rich as an industry representative. I don't know if you want to go in that order or.
That sounds fine.
Okay. Hi all, Mieko, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Miyako Ozeki, and I come to the commission as a representative for direct markets and mostly in the marketing area. My past experience is that I was the market director for the Burlington Farmers Market all through the first years of the pandemic, and seeing the impact on vendors as well as on market managers in regards to kind of how volatile it could be in terms of creating a marketplace, particularly direct markets, to both promote the brand that is Vermont, but also to provide opportunities for producers. So when one of the boards that I am on is the Vermont Farmers Market Association, Vermont Farmers Market Association. They brought up forth this commission. I was excited to take part in it and be part of it. My sense of being part of this process has been a unique opportunity to be able to see 12 different industries come together to kind of as an aggregate of representation of a lot of other participants in this food system, to have conversations that are both actually very civil as well as collaborative in many ways. And then thanks in part to the part of this process, in addition to having Secretary Tebbetts and Curley in kind of coordinating and chairing this, that I'm hiring a consulting a CBI to help coordinate all of us in that conversation, to be able to organize us, as well as listen to everyone's recommendations and sides, as well as then being able to get us the resources we need to get further insights on the recommendations that we put forth. One of the there was a lot of priorities that were set forth in the first 2 years of us working together in the commission. And by the way, I would say in short order, when we started in April, and to get our first commission report done by November was an amazing feat, especially during COVID, when we only got to meet each other once. And then the second report, I think one of the great things too is that because we got to know each other as commissioners, we really were able to coalesce and carry forward from the first report to the second report our further recommendations, and still keeping with some of our top priorities and the governor's priorities. And so looking forward, one of the strategies that I'm really excited about is the $10 million grant, as I heard from a lot of producers from all these particular sectors, the need for that support for infrastructure to further grow, as well as then to have further impact. So not only is these infrastructure projects helpful for those industries, they actually have a ripple effect around their communities in terms of an economic impact. So thinking beyond just the industry, just think about all the other industries that are touched upon, as well as social agencies that also are impacted by it. And so I think that's pretty much what I would say on my end. I really appreciated the process, and I'm looking forward to our final year of working together and hoping to further recommendations for the next year.
Thank you.
I think I'm next up. I'm Jed Davis. It's my pleasure to work for the dairy farm families that own the Agri-Mart Co-op and Cabot Creamery. And I serve as our Vice President of Strategic Engagement and Sustainability. And my role on the commission is in that category, environmental and sustainability topic. And like Mieko, and I think you'll hear this from David as well, it really has been a space where, as you heard, we meet monthly, and that space has been very rich in both what people have brought to the space in terms of their life experiences and their intelligence in this whole notion of where do we need to go and where do we need to be supported in terms of agriculture, but also truly an enjoyable experience because of the way people have been willing to roll up their sleeves and really think about this. And we're dealing with, and we've known this from April, when it initially started, that Vermont's changing. It's defined by its rural character, but we're seeing changes in population, land management practices, so forth and so on. And yet I think you heard from both the secretaries that recognition of agriculture being such an important and principal engine for Vermont's rural economy. And so holding that up as to inform everything that we do. Now, from my perspective, as someone who works for Cabot, there are a number of the topics that we cover that, whether it's, helping to work on branding relative to agriculture in the state of Vermont, or whether it relates to, the fact that at the end of the day, we know that the dairy industry is going through its own changes, but it is essential to our agricultural future, and it continues to be important both from an infrastructure standpoint and from a sales and working landscape standpoint. And at the same time, we know that farm succession and making sure that there are pathways to bring in that next generation is going to continue to be critical. I would say the other thing that I appreciate about this commission is the way that even in those lenses, we're looking at it in terms of how can we be as inclusive as possible in this? How is it possible to modify and adapt agriculture in a way that really continues to celebrate its importance in the state and make sure that there are as many opportunities for either continuing existing enterprises or especially inviting entrepreneurs who wish to advance in whatever way agriculture can meaningfully diversify going forward. So I think I just want to take that short time and obviously happy to answer any questions, but I'll pass the baton here to our friend David.
Thank you very much, Jed and Mieko. Look forward to us all being together again soon. I'm David Roth. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. I'm speaking to you from St. Johnsbury. I am CEO and owner of an organization called the Wakaya Group, and we produce and I own organic farms in many parts of the world, Fiji and Tonga and Peru and Nicaragua. We specifically focus on value-added products like ginger and turmeric and cocoa and all sorts of interesting tropical goods. I used to run Fiji Water in Fiji for quite a long time before we came to Vermont, which we find much more beautiful, which I think is an important thing to say. I'm also owner and founder of Carey and Maine, which is a maple production company. We make a wide variety of maple products from the Carey and Maine is where I'm speaking to you right now. George Carey, as I hope you all know, essentially started the maple industry here in Vermont, and I'm sitting in the house that he built, and we are producing up at one of his first sugar bushes in Danville. I noted a gentleman from Danville in one of his original old sugar houses. So being part of this commission, not only from a personal, professional framework, but from a policy-making perspective, has been quite remarkable. I'm working with Secretary Curley, Secretary Tebbetts, and our commissioners. I think, as Jed said, this has been a space where we can all not only bring our expertise to bear, but be part of very vibrant conversations all about what Secretary Curley said relative to building the agricultural economy of the future. And that really is just in my few moments what I wanted to focus on relative specifically to a couple of the priorities and funding proposals that have been created. relative to the $10 million ask and the priorities within that food producers, value-added processors proposal, it has been quite striking to me, again, and this was spoken to, I think, quite eloquently by a few others, the barriers to entry, not only in the maple industry, which I know very well, but barriers to entry into agriculture for either the next generation or the subsequent generations of farmers are significant. And those barriers are not only economic, they're also social, they are quite significant. And I'm using, for example, my interaction with the St. Johnsbury Academy. We are creating an infrastructure there to allow for interns to go out into the field and work at farms and work at agricultural enterprises all over the Northeast Kingdom. But as you all know, the Academy has a lot of students from elsewhere, not from Vermont, from other parts of the country, other parts of the world, that I often speak with groups of students, both formally and informally. And I was really struck just a couple of weeks ago when I was talking with them about agriculture, specifically maple. And I just asked, how many of you see yourself in agriculture after you leave school? And I paused and I heard exactly what I hear right now, nothing. Nobody raised their hand. Not one of the students said, I'm going to do that. Nobody. Now, that isn't necessarily because it's not of interest. It's because it doesn't seem to be that future in which they see themselves. And obviously that is a snapshot, but it was a very powerful snapshot for me, especially given the context, as Secretary Curley and Secretary Tebbetts said, as we're working to build the agricultural economy of the future. Well, that requires people who are going to come into this industry and state, not just simply do it because their parents and their grandparents and their grandparents before did it. So that relates to my last point, a topic which both Mieko and Jed spoke to. I hope that we will be able to, in subsequent conversations, deal much more specifically with the need for a codification around the Vermont brand. I think we all feel what the Vermont brand is. If we were all polled today, we would probably come up with some of the same definitions. But from a market perspective, both from outside of Vermont, inside of Vermont, relative to our ability to really create value for producers around a Vermont brand, I think there's a lot of work that not only should be done, but could be very valuable and differentiate an existing effort from, say, the Seal of Quality, which, as you all or many remember, is a benighted program, which unfortunately died because it really there was no there. And I think we bring a lot of enthusiasm to really creating something that not only we could be proud of, but that would bring again, great value to producers and help encourage people to come to the state of Vermont to do their work. And obviously out in the marketplace, when I'm traveling all over the world, I was, as Secretary Tebbetts knows, I was just in Dubai with maple syrup, and the extraordinary response to what we have in Vermont proves the thesis of everything we've talked about and the necessity of the proposals that are on the table right now that Abby just went through. So again, it's a pleasure to be a part of this, and I do look forward to meeting you all in person soon. So thank you.
Thank you very much. You're up, Justin.
So Justin, yeah, you're up, but you might have been off screen when we identified the order
No,
for you.
I'm just waiting to be prompted. My name is Justin Rich. I'm a produce farmer over in Huntington. We grow about 25 acres of organic vegetables, mostly greenhouse tomatoes in the summer, and then most of our acreage is devoted to storage crops like potatoes, squash, onions, etc. And I'm also the president of the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers Association, which has over 400 specialty crop grower members in the state of Vermont. I'll keep this brief. I think you're mostly interested in hearing what we have to say as an organization about funding priorities. And I'll keep it quite simple in saying that the most valuable way we receive support is when a new issue comes down the pike, be it food safety, or produce safety or environmental issues. And then funding comes along to help us with the technical, mostly equipment to solve those problems. Two of the very well-run programs in the state of Vermont that I've been the beneficiary of have been the produce safety improvement grants, which came through probably 4 years ago. And that was, again, in response to this idea that we need to, not be washing greens and putting them in wooden totes, which can then harbor bacteria or fungi. So helping people upgrade to stainless steel and plastic washing equipment. It's fairly simple stuff, but if you've ever bought anything made of stainless steel, it's very expensive. So that program was phenomenal. It was one of the easiest grants a lot of us ever really applied for. And they provided very simple, straightforward, massive improvements to all of our operations who got those grants. So that was the Produce Safety Improvement Grant. The second one would be the CEAP grants that the Agency of Ag does annually. That's the Capital Equipment Assistance Program. And that is mostly to solve water quality issues. So helping dairy farmers upgrade to manure injection equipment or no-till drills, or we got a grant to help get a better fertilizer spreader that would allow us to control exactly where we're placing all our fertilizer. And even though we're small acreage, we farm along a lot of rivers. So keeping the fertilizer where we want it and not where we don't is very valuable to everyone. And these equipment, they're not cheap. And virtually no vegetable or fruit farms in Vermont is actually large. There's a question earlier about what is a small and medium farm, but it's pretty much almost all of them. You could probably count on one, maybe two hands, the number of produce farms in the state of Vermont that would be considered medium-sized on a national scale. But the good thing about these programs are they're very valuable to the individual farmer, and they come with technical assistance from UVM Extension or the Agency of Ag. And on top of that, they provide a space so that farmers can experiment and try out new pieces of equipment that might or might not work in the state of Vermont. And maybe a vegetable farmer might not be able to invest $12,000 in a specialty tool, but with the proper funding, they might be able to try something out and then spread that as a possible solution to problems to other growers. So that's where a lot of this stuff becomes most valuable, because people are often quite surprised at how much money it takes to run even a small produce farm. I mean, I've been on our property for 14 years now, and it just doesn't stop. And I'm happy to do it. It's kind of how my brain works. But all the assistance we can get is very valuable, especially when it's addressing a new problem that just kind of floats in front of us. So I'll keep that short and cut off right here. Does anybody have any questions specifically about the produce world before lunch?
I'm not seeing hands.
And I'll just say, I'm always happy if legislators or people from Agency of Ag want to come by and visit a medium-size, relatively fast-paced produce operation, just drop me an email, and I love showing people around. And all these farms are very different from each other, so maybe you've seen one, but I'm always amazed when I jump on somebody else's farm what I can learn. Yeah. So if that helps anybody with context of the problems we're dealing with, I'm always happy to give people tours around if you're in the Huntington area.
Great. Well, good. We appreciate that offer. And we'll just look around one more time, see if there are any questions for anyone. I will just say, sort of to close and maybe get us thinking about the follow-up conversation. We've certainly heard anecdotally lots of times about the shortage of meat processing capacity in the state. I think we've heard less about produce, and that may just be a bias. Maybe I'm not picking up on those conversations, both in and outside of the committee, and even less perhaps about maple. So I think the more that you can help us better understand the needs there that we may not have already heard about, the more helpful that would be. And also just thinking, just yesterday, I think maybe when Secretary Tibbetts, you were here, I had a quick conversation about some of the extremely large corporate multinational maple businesses that are setting up here, and thinking, well, that's probably not who these grants would be targeted at, but want to better understand what do we mean by small and medium and all those other contexts. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thanks again, everybody.
You're welcome.
Thank you.